gifted to have Janet with us today. She is my heroine, a person that is one of the wise women in my life. Lifelong resident of Dorchester, mother of 3 children, including Joel, who was murdered. I caught up a little bit driving here on the other 2, and they're doing well. This is coming up to the anniversary this Friday of Joel's death, and that's a poignant moment. And the son is, whatever, your son is in Florida right now. That's his way of dealing with it.
He said, is it warm? He said, it's not 6 degrees. But and I'm in shorts.
Other thing you can say about Janet, you're the mother to a lot of kids, a lot of children in Dorchester and around the city who would call you mom. Community activist for 40 years, was doing community work long before this, but has incorporated into her work, and your work before this made a big difference in how you dealt with this, as I hear your story. Worked with ROCA, the organization in Chelsea, worked with youth, and was instrumental in getting circles started there and teaching them. You worked with the Lewis Brown Peace Institute as well as the supporter of victims, survivor support coordinator. One of our students in this class, one of the first times we taught it here at the School of Theology here in Freeport, is now went on to Northeastern Law School after graduating from BU School of Theology, and they did an interesting thing. They had and she's going to come see us at the last session. We'll talk a little bit about her work. But at Northeastern, everybody in the first year is assigned to a law office. And that office decides who their client's going to be and what they're going to work on. And she was part of and she coordinated an office working with the juvenile justice system. They brought in a couple of juvenile court judges, including Judge Blitzman, who teaches at the law school, and a couple of DAs and some defense lawyers, and those were their clients. And they designed a restorative justice program for the juvenile courts. One of the things I'm going to tell you is that probably when you graduate, if you want to do this work, and I hope it's incorporated in your life, whether you're doing corporate work on Wall Street or wherever you are, and as somebody pointed out, I think it was Danielle, that this is applicable to all of your relationships, family relationships, not just your story was remarkable, this story with your friend. Yeah. But a lot of this, you're not going to find a job posting that says, would you be this restorative justice person? And so Erin created her own job. She was entrepreneurial, and now she is the director of this group with Judge Blitzman and others, and Janet works closely with her doing circles in the juvenile courts. You've worked with the schools doing alternative to suspension, a lot of work in the schools, which is really important work. There are a lot of things you can say. You're on certain statewide leadership boards, like maybe you can speak more about that, but that's enough. Don't you think?
Yeah.
to tell you that Janet is somebody that we need to hear. And so, Janet, I won't tell your story, you're going to tell your story. Okay? So welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. And I would like to just sort of pass this talking piece around and just have people say their name and what school they're in and what does justice mean to you. You are so lucky to be the first.
I'm Stephanie Riley. I'm doing Stephanie Riley, no, I'm doing a PhD, thank you, 4th year PhD, writing a dissertation on shame. What does justice mean to me?
That's a hard one.
Yeah. The thing that pops into mind, since I have no sort of academic definition of that word, is some sort of achieving a sense of wholeness.
you.
My name is Nelson Escobar. I am currently working in a philosophy, theology, and ethics program here at Boston University. About the question justice, I don't know what to say. I would like to.
You got a lot to say on that, Elson. Reflection you said a lot.
Let me see. I think it will be doing good, as Aristotle used to put it. He used to see it as a virtue of doing good. So to me, that's what justice or true justice is, and it should be.
Thank you. Awesome.
My name is Sarah. I attend here at Boston University School of Theology. And similarly, I think of justice as goodness and righteousness and love rewarded.
Mm.
I'm Jessica, I'm a third-year law student. And I think my imperfect definition of justice is going to have to be what everyone getting what they need as best we can.
Mm.
Thank you.
I'm Eileen, I'm a second-year law student, and to me, justice is fairness and being treated equally and respected.
And what was your name again?
Eileen.
Eileen.
I'm Sarah, and I'm an undergraduate studying international relations, and I'm still working on developing my idea of justice, but I guess what I have now is just a sense of right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Memory, and I'm doing MTS first year. I think justice is doing the right thing when it is not expected.
Hi, my name is Annie. I'm a third-year law student, and to me, I think justice means striking the right balance in the world.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm a third-year law student at BU, and I think for me, doing justice is being able to identify the brokenness in our society and healing it.
My name is Sohani. I'm a third-year law student, and I guess I would conceptualize justice as access to equal opportunity for people.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Terrence. I'm a second-year law student, and I guess justice would be getting the injured person back to a sense of balance.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a second-year law student, and I think I would define justice as maximizing goodness and doing right by people, regardless of what the law may say.
Hi again, I'm Nicole. I'm a second-year law student as well, and I think justice is about achieving fairness and about doing what's right.
Hi, I'm Rob. I'm a second-year law student. My definition is not very good, but I'd just say it's right and wrong. I kind of think of justice more as being not preemptive, but trying to fix something that has already happened. So I think law school has definitely colored my view on that.
And you're all dressed up, you must have been in court today.
My name is Andrew. I'm a second-year MDiv student, and to kind of take a piece out of my UU faith, I'd say it's equitable compassion in our relationships.
I'm Melissa. I'm an MDiv student at Andover Newton Theological School, and I think justice includes resolution with some sense of wholeness.
My name is Christina. I'm a MDiv student here at BU School of Theology. Like others have said, I think that justice has a lot to do with healing and wholeness. And there's some movement towards a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. Something about abundance versus scarcity.
I'm Kate, and I'm a second year MDiv as well.
or not as well, but.
I didn't hear your name.
Sorry, I'm Kate. I'm a second year
Kate.
MDiv, SDH. And I've been thinking a lot about just peace lately. And so I think I would say that my working definition of justice right now includes the ideas of shalom, kind of a peace that comes not out of like an easy solution, but a solution that includes kind of what everybody's been saying, fairness.
I'm Nick. I'm a first year MTS student. I would say my idea of justice is equal treatment for all people, regardless of socioeconomic status or their past.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I'm a first year social work and theology student at Boston College. And my definition of justice is right relationship. And I think it's also, a mindset.
I'm Lindsay. I'm a second year MTS student in School of Theology. I think justice is people being allowed the opportunity to flourish. So human flourishing, basically.
Thank you.
I'm Tom, and for right now, it's right relations, fulfilling the obligations of relationships.
Okay.
Very good definition, weren't they?
They are. I'm going to read them. Because we made quite a good list. So, identifying society's broken places and healing them, access to equal opportunity, that the injured person finds a sense and gets back of getting back to balance, maximizing goodness, doing right no matter what the law said. I love that part. Achieving fairness, righting wrong, equitable compassion, relationships, wholeness, resolution, healing, wholeness, mindset of abundance versus scarcity. It's hard to read your writing when you're scribbling. Just peace, in the sense of shalom, so a solution that you kind of really have to work for, one that doesn't always come easy, but where people come together and work for it. Equal treatment for all. Right relationship is a mindset. Allowing people the opportunity to flourish. Right relationships, what did you say? Fulfilling obligations. Wholeness, doing good, goodness, oh, I can't read this is terrible. It was right over here.
Goodness, righteousness. Goodness, righteousness, and love.
That's right, goodness, love, and righteousness, yes, I got that, thank you. And then everyone gets what they need, fairness, righting wrongs, doing the right thing, balance. There's one other one I'm missing that would be right around here somewhere. Can you read? Connected? Did you write down stuff?
Yeah. Identify brokenness and healing it. Access of equal, striking right balance.
It was after doing the right thing.
It was good. I don't know what.
It was one of you, so. But anyway, thank you. It's a great list. And it really makes you see how justice is far more than what happens in the criminal justice system. And that we all face every day. We all see, if we don't face it ourselves, we see other people facing incidences of justice and injustice. It happens in schools, it happens in community, it happens everywhere we go. And so somebody said it was, a lot of you said it was about relationships, but somebody also said it was more about a way of being. Is one of you over here? It was about a way of being. So for me, restorative justice it's not a program. It is about a way to be. And so it's a way to walk in this life that really treats all of your relationships with great respect, even those ones that are difficult. So gonna start just giving you a little bit of, Tom gave you some history, but I have been an activist all my life. I am about to turn 64, so it was somewhere when I was around 19 that my first sort of act of activism was when I was in high school, and we had a nun who convinced us all to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go boycott outside United Fruit, which was in South Boston, around the farm workers and the boycotting grapes. And then when I was 19 and I was a single parent and I was on welfare, and so I began to do welfare rights. And so, but it was in that experience of doing welfare rights work that I learned that no matter what happens to us, but no matter what situation we are facing, no matter what adversity we're facing, it's always bigger than ourselves. So a lot of times in organizing and in community organizing, people will come into a situation out of their own personal need, but then will realize that it is bigger than themselves. And so, and that is what I learned. And thankfully that helped for me set the premise to get me through a lot of other things in my life. And so, and I grew up in a situation where there was alcohol and abuse, and so I worked a lot in abuse prevention programs and family support and strengthening programs. I worked with kids. I'm not college educated, so all of my work has really been based on my own personal experiences, taking it from there, and sort of everything kind of built on each other. In the 70s, I began to know a little bit about what went on inside of prisons, because we worked with this organization called Families and Friends of Prisoners, and it was based actually on the Black Panther model of getting a cadre of volunteers together who would drive families out to the prisons for visits, because the prisons, for the most part, are set off in the suburbs, and bus fare is expensive for someone who was going to be bringing a whole family out. But in the 70s, it was a very volatile time in prisons in this country. Attica happened. What's the one in California that happened?
San Quentin. No.
It wasn't San Quentin.
No,
it was the other one.
Right.
Salinas?
Big one. I don't know if Salinas is big enough, but this was a big one. Anyway. And here in Massachusetts, the prison is actually Tucholoma Walpole. And so I learned a lot then about kind of the maltreatment of prisoners during that time. And I wrestled with, and still do wrestle with, the fact that we live in a so-called civilized society, but we put people in cages. So I know that when people do something wrong, there has to be consequences. But I do believe that consequences don't always have to be about punishment. Now, that being said, the two of the young men that I met with who were involved in my son's murder, there were 4 of them, and I'll say more about that in a minute, but they both said that being incarcerated saved their lives because it interrupted the cycle that they were in. And so it makes me think that if that's the case, then what can happen inside institutions, in prisons, that can really help prepare people to come back out? Because you can do 40 years in prison, you can do a life sentence in prison and never own your accountability. You never have to say what you did. You stand up in court and you say, I'm not guilty, whether you are guilty as dirt. You say, I'm not guilty. And most lawyers would not advise you to say, you're guilty. Unless you were going to get a good plea deal. So for me, the whole system is kind of based on a lie when I look at it in that way. And I do believe that we as human beings really and truly need to be held accountable, that we cannot move forward in a good way if we don't own our responsibility for things, that we cannot forgive ourselves for anything wrong that we've done until we own the accountability. And so therefore, people who are going to prison, who are returning back to community, if they have not gone through this restorative process and looked within themselves to understand the impact of what they've done and own their accountability and forgive themselves, then they cannot come back to family and community in a good way. And there will be more destruction in those families and in those communities. And it is a cycle that keeps on going and keeps on going. Chief Justice Robert Yazzie of the Navajo Nation, he has a saying that I really like. It's very simple. You can't get to a good place in a bad way. So, 13 years ago, on January 31st, when my son was killed, the foundations of all these beliefs were crumbling. My life's work came into question. I wondered if it was of any value at all to have worked in these programs and yet not even be able to keep my own kid from being killed. After Joel was killed, the night that Joel was killed, I was visiting a friend in a hospital. And I suddenly got violently ill as I was visiting her. And I came home and I barely made it into the bathroom again, being sick, when there was this unbelievably hard knock on the door, banging on my door. And I opened it and it was my oldest son, David, who had come to tell me that Joel had been killed. And David and his friend Timmy they had heard from Joel's friends, and they had driven around from hospital to hospital. They first went to Boston Medical Center. They said he wasn't there. They went to Kearney. They went to Brigham. They went to a bunch of different places. At one place, and when they went to Kearney called Boston Medical Center again. And David had a feeling leaving there because he saw them washing out in the ambulance. And so my son had to be the one who went and identified Joel's body. So I say this because the impact of this to this day is the reason why he goes away this week. Because it's just too hard for him to be here. My daughter, Shayna, has moved to New Orleans because it's just too hard for her to be in Boston now. So the impact is just incredible. And the statistics say for homicide that, for every homicide victim, that there's 10 people who are strongly affected. We know that that is completely low. That is a really, really, really low number. So I think about some of Joel's friends who turned to alcohol and drugs, some who made it through it, some who didn't, some who were maybe playing around with stuff already, but that this really put them over the edge. And I wish I could restore those relationships. I really wish I could restore those and help them. And that is 13 years later, people still struggling with addiction and alcoholism. At the time, that night, there were so many young people on my front porch, in my living room. They were crying, they were curled up in fetal position. It was incredible. But we really put out a very strong message that we did not want anybody else heard in Joel's name. And we held circles. We actually had critical incidents debriefing teams come in we held circles, but we pushed them, those debriefing, to be more, to also not just do the debriefing questions, but to also explore the feelings of revenge and them as normal human feelings. To talk about the difference between having those feelings and acting on those feelings, because when we act on those feelings, we become what's caused us so much pain, and we will be causing other people that same pain. And we asked the young people to make commitments to keep the peace. Now, they did not want to be in a public setting. They didn't want to be at a post or a library or anything. They wanted to be at my house. So it's February, and we had to go out in the backyard because there were so many young people who came. We had to like scout up lawn furniture from neighbors and everything. We had a few circles, and each time there was like 35, 40 kids who came. Some who came repeatedly, and others who were new. And so they all kept those agreements. They have all kept those agreements. There was not any acts of retaliation or revenge that happened, as far as I know. And I did get phone calls sometimes in the middle of the night. I did get visits sometimes in the middle of the night. You know, where people would cry, where people would just talk about how angry they were. And it's oftentimes surviving family members who are left with this sort of burden of keeping the peace. Some of you nodding, Nicole, of keeping the peace, of helping the friends to get through it, even when you're in incredible pain yourself. I don't regret it in any way. It just shows how much need there is for support for survivors of homicide victims, or survivors of any violent crime, themselves or their family members. Because everybody gets affected. My life was permanently altered. We talk in our family before Joe died, after Joe died. Our life has been sort of divided. So there were 4 young men who were arrested in Joel's murder. They ranged in age from 17 to 22. The 22-year-old was very well known in circles of, not restorative circles, but in circles with youth workers in the Dorchester, South Boston communities. A lot of youth workers that I talked to who had kids who were in trouble could make a connection to this man, because he would recruit kids to sell drugs and stuff. The 17-year-old had just turned 17. He is the one who actually stabbed my son. It was a home invasion, and my son was selling weed. And one of his roommates was selling OxyContin, which he had gotten a prescription for. And that's why they came into the house. We were very lucky, and I really want to put this out there, because we were very lucky in that arrests were made very soon. Some of the reason why arrests were made soon was because people called the hotline. People called the anonymous hotline. There are so many, having worked at the Lewis Brown Peace Institute with other survivors, and I currently work on a homicide support services program out of Beth Israel, the Center for Violence Prevention and Recovery. And so I'm a member of Mothers for Justice and Equality, which is a group of surviving mothers, and a member of Legacy Lives On. And so being associated with these organizations and knowing so many survivors, we're in a family, we're in a club we never wanted to be in. But you are immediately family upon meeting another survivor. because nobody can understand like a survivor can understand. Lost my thought, but what I was going to say is that I know that there are so many families who have absolutely no resolution. And let me tell you that no matter what, there is never enough resolution, because nothing brings our children back or our loved ones back. But there are so many families who still wonder who, or who know who, but there's not enough evidence. So there are so many families. I can remember those 3 weeks of 2-3 weeks of like looking around and thinking, oh, is he one of Joel's friends? Did he know Joel? Did he kill Joel? I can remember going into the corner store and wondering who was in there. Being at the ATM in line and wondering who's behind me. So I cannot imagine what it is to be someone who has lost someone they love to homicide and still have that case unsolved. So I really just want to say that, because there's far too many. And we were lucky. And we have survived. We always talk a lot about how we use the words lucky and happy and stuff like that. And strange sometimes the things that make you feel lucky. Strange sometimes the things that make you feel happy. But there was, all 4 of them were at first charged with murder in the first degree. 2 of them were able to plead down and plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for testimony. 1 of them refused to testify, pleaded guilty to murder too. He's also the one who kicked in the door, so he's doing 25 to life now. He recently tried to reverse his guilty plea, and it was denied. I'm sometimes thinking I might meet with him. I have not yet met with him. The 4th young man, the youngest, the young man who actually killed Joel, went to trial and beat his case. And I can still hear myself screaming. We went out in the hallway, and I had to lean against the wall because I thought I was going to go down. And I can still hear myself screaming from the belly of my soul, he got away with murder. He got away with murder. I was just screaming it over and over and over again. And then this door slammed, and it echoed in the hallway. And I remember feeling so silenced at that moment. And I don't know if that was the door to the judge's chamber. I don't know if that was the door in which this young man and his family and his lawyers were in. I still don't know who slammed that door. But I do remember that I just felt so silenced, like I wasn't supposed to be upset, like I was just supposed to accept this. And so I went home, and over the next couple of days, I wrote this. When I wrote this, I was very angry, but I can't change anything in it now, even over time. And I'm not a person who kind of holds on to anger. I have, in many ways, transformed my anger into compassion and action. But when I read this, it's just true. It is true. It was my family's experience. Law and Justice, what I learned about it through the hearings and trials of the defendants in my son's murder. I learned that law and justice seem to have absolutely nothing to do with each other or anything fair. That truth-telling or truth-finding is not at all important to justice, that legality gets in the way of morality, that law and justice seem to have nothing to do with humanity. I learned that this case was not about my son or my family, it is the state's case. That any efforts the ADA makes to include families in decision-making is a sincere but token courtesy at best, and it is void of any power to the family. That personally, ADAs may truly care about their victims and families, but professionally, they struggle with many systemic obstacles and barriers to bring that caring into the courtroom, and that they have very little power of their own. I learned that defendants can buy and choose their attorney, that victims and families have attorneys assigned to them, that the defense can appeal an unfavorable verdict to them, that victims and victims' families cannot, that the victim and the state witness can be slandered and attacked in court, but the defendant is protected. I learned that judges do not have as much power as I thought, or that they choose not to exercise power sometimes, abandoning the truth to defend the jury system, that in spite of this, a good judge can show courtesy and respect to all parties with a warm and caring dignity. I learned that some defense attorneys don't seem to care about the fact that their clients murdered someone, that they turn murderers back out on the streets of our community where they probably do not live, that they are allowed to lie both directly and implicitly in their efforts to plant reasonable doubt, that they feel justified in using the same thing they slander the victim with to be an excuse for the defendant's murderous actions. I learned that the life of the person murdered does not matter at all in the courtroom, that we as family and friends of the person murdered do not matter at all in the courtroom. I learned that juries do not have all the information, are not told anywhere near the whole story, that they make decisions which affect people's lives in very big ways with very little information and not much truth. That some jurors make value judgments about the murdered victim based on defense attorneys' shameful lies and exaggerations. That jurors get tired, want to go home, return to work, and therefore cave into peer pressure. I learned that if a murderer dresses up in a suit, a far cry from the masked intruder who invaded my son's home wielding a huge knife, stands before the court with his baby face and lies with a not guilty plea, they can fool a jury. I learned that not even a picture of my son's baby face could be represented in the courtroom. That if a murderer masks himself like a coward when he commits the crime, he can get away with murder. That he never even has to offer an alibi in the courtroom as to his whereabouts and doings at the time of the murder he's charged with. I learned that if you have a police officer in your family who is willing to neglect their duty to come forward with the truth, that they will advise you not to do so either. That they will further advise you that if and when you are arrested, be sure and keep quiet. Don't say a word. I learned that if you have a priest in your family who does not care if he is a disgrace to the church and faith he represents, he will lie for you in court. I learned that the level of respect and disrespect, the level of caring and lack of care shown to our family and friends vary greatly from person to person, based on judgments, incorrect assumptions, based on age, all of that kind of thing. I learned that some members of my family felt truly cared for and respected by the ADA and by the detectives, and that others were left feeling hurt and angry, disrespected, and discounted. I learned that some perpetrators and their family blame my family and my son for the legal situation they find themselves in as the consequence of their actions, and that some people will take anyone else they can down rather than face up to the truth of their own murderous selves. That some people don't even care that they killed someone. I learned some perpetrators and their families are courageous enough to express their regrets and remorse to us, to own responsibility and accept the consequences of their actions. That the latter makes a difference to us as family and friends of murder victims, the person that we loved. That no amends or apologies can ever bring our beloved JoJo back, but those expressions from the families of those people who killed Joel, from their broken hearts, help us to restore our faith in humanity and bring us closer to some kind of reconciliation and amends. I learned there are no winners here. I learned that these expressions of remorse and regret can come from those you thought the least likely to do so, and that I must check myself on my own judgments. I learned over and over again the importance of peacekeeping, that families of murder victims often bear the burden and work very hard to keep the peace. I learned over and over again the importance of family and friends, their love and support. I learned that your victim advocate, no matter how in earnest they are, no matter how nice they are, how sweet and respectful they may be, is caught in a bind. They work for the DA's office and are in fact an advocate to that office before they are an advocate to you or for you. They are in reality a liaison between families and the DA's office. I learned that the DA's office has a repertoire of party lines that they spout by rote during each discussion or disagreement you may have with them. That superiors in the DA's office are public servants who get upset if the public actually calls them. That the advocates and ADAs who do try hard to go above and beyond are held back by the superiors' tight control. That advocates and ADAs who want to practice in an inclusive, family-friendly way seemingly do so in a vacuum without standard constructs, principles, or philosophical premises to act within. That often the workings of our law and justice system itself prevent the above from happening. I learned that a murder trial can be a shameful mockery of the sanctity of human life, that the victim is invisible and immaterial, that a murder trial is a performance. Best actor wins, it's a game. Win one, lose one, oh well. In spite of all this, the good and the bad, this is what I know. I know that I want no further harm to come to anyone in my son's name, that living peacefully and being the best people we can be is our greatest revenge, that there are no winners here, it's all tragic loss and waste of young people's precious lives. I know that the accused stabber is the stabber, that not guilty does not in any way mean innocent, that he did not deserve to get away with murder, that he cannot fool us, himself, or God, like he fooled the jury. I know that truth is ultimately what matters in life and to God, if not in the courtroom, that I have to let go of the anger of the courtroom injustice done to my son's stolen life, that I have to turn my anger into compassionate action and turn my trust over to the hands of a far wiser and more compassionate power, a power higher than the court, and that in the end, my son's murderer will be held accountable. I know that same police officer, relative of the murderer mentioned before, has probably arrested several others since my son's murder, most for lesser offenses, but they are someone else's son, brother, nephew. That the law enforcement people in my family circle are saddened and conflicted as they continue to uphold the system they believe in and work for. That our family cops who have passed on, my dad, my Uncle Tom, that they're rolling over and cursing from their graves. I know that my family and friends are totally disgusted, that the family youngsters are disillusioned, that they have learned a very sad lesson about a very sorry system, that my son's friends abandoned revenge and further violence as a means of justice, that they put their faith in the legal system to get it for us and for Joel, that they got none, and that we all deserve a better justice. I know that we feel like we lost my son all over again, that the system failed my son in us miserably. I know that this travesty of justice happened during Victim Rights Awareness Week that year, that the time is past due for victims and their families to have rights, presence, and voice in the courtroom. I know very strongly that it cannot be instead of defendants' rights, but in balance with them. That there are times when the system does not work in the other direction as well. That guilty people go free and innocent people go to prison. I know that my young neighbor is sentenced to life in prison without parole for a murder that I and many others do not believe he committed. That his family reflects the pain of my own families on the other side. Now, this young man and my son were friends. That his son was 2 when he was arrested, and he is now 14 or 15. That when he was little, he was angry and confused and acted up in school and had nightmares and drew picture after picture after picture of his dad for his dad. And that what he wants most, even still to this day, is for his daddy to come home. That he feels powerless to bring his daddy home. And that all the adults around him are powerless to do so as well. I know that his father is innocent and in jail for life, that my son's murderer is guilty, and that he got away with murder. I know that that is twice too many times for the system not to work, and that this happens countless times every day across our nation. That I have to work somehow towards making these changes in our justice system. I know that law and justice should indeed be about truth, that it should be about people's lives, those lost and those who have to keep on living with the loss of their loved ones. That the outcomes of law and justice affect families and community. That some of us have to live the very difficult and complicated consequence of the imperfections of the simple cliche that was said to me over and over again: ours is not a perfect system. That I will continue to pray, I know this, to live in peace, to take actions that promote peaceful ways in our community and our world. That I will continue to love and be loved, to nurture and be nurtured by family, friends, and community. I know that none of this will ever, ever, ever take away the hurt of losing my son Joel to murder. That none of this can give him back his life or bring him back home to us. I hope that it can make a difference for other families who lost a loved one to murder. I hope that it can make a difference for other families who have had a child incarcerated or deported. That it can prevent someone from turning to violence. That it can prevent someone from being murdered. I know that I must do this work, that it's the only way I can continue to keep on living my life. So, I decided I had to make my own justice. And I knew about restorative justice back in the 70s. I had seen some progress made back then. I'd seen some sort of community mediation things, but I also saw stuff kind of get taken up by the system and co-opted, really, and diluted. And that is one of the sort of rubs, I think, that in some ways we want systems to take up. To take things up, but when they take things up, they tend to screw them up. So, is my feeling. These are not absolutes by any means. This is my stuff. But so I knew about victim-offender dialogue, and in the spring, after Joe was killed, I actually went to a conference that was held at BC that was by murder victims' families. It was then called Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation. It's now called Murder Victims' Families for Human Rights. And basically, they're an international organization that is against the death penalty. So they actually include in their membership families of people who have been executed by states. But in that conference, there was a lot of people who had gone through a victim-offender dialogue process. There were a lot of workshops about it. And so I went, and there was one person in particular who kind of impressed me, and I took his name. And then I saw him later on this is all still before trials. So I saw him later on at another conference and took his information again. And then I was working for the Louis Brown Peace Institute. So I had a privilege and a connectedness that a lot of families don't have. So I knew the Director of Victim Services for the Department of Corrections. And I told her, Erin, I want to have a dialogue with those two young men who pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and they're coming out. They received sentences of 8 to 10 and 10 to 12 years. They're coming back out. If they keep on doing that same old dirt they're doing, they're going to dump their garbage right back on us again in the community. She said that there was no victim offender dialogue program in the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. And I said, so what can we do about that then? And she encouraged me to write a letter to the then commissioner, which was Kathleen Denny, and that's really all it took. I did. I wrote the letter. Commissioner Dennehy approved it. It was very carefully watched. It was very orchestrated. We knew what we were doing at 9:10, and we knew what we were doing at 9:13. And the only thing they didn't know is how long exactly we were going to be taking. But it was very orchestrated, and Erin Gaffney, who was the Director of Victim Services, had to report to the commissioner right away. So I went the day of my first encounter. But so I did contact this man, John Wilson, from Just Alternatives, which is in Brooklyn, Maine, and he trains people in victim offender dialogue and also does dialogues across the country. I mean, people, prisons in other states actually call him in to do the dialogue, so he does a lot of travel for it. And I met first with this young man, Michael. And Michael has agreed to be in the film, so if you ever see the film when it comes out, you'll meet a bit of Michael. But it was a 9-month preparation process that we went through. So every few weeks, John would drive to the prison and visit Michael, and then he would drive and visit me and exchange information. There was written materials that both Michael and I filled out about why we wanted to do this, what we wanted to get out of it, all of that. John really stresses accountability and for the person who caused the harm to really listen. He will do a dialogue if the person doesn't own accountability, but he will make that very clear to the person, the survivor or the victim. I hate these words, victim and offender, so I stumble over them all the time. And it's kind of, we don't have the replacement language, so it's hard sometimes. And particularly in the case of youth violence, because today's offenders can be tomorrow's victims so easily. And because all of us are victims and offenders on some level. We've all caused some harm. We've all been harmed. Some more extreme than others, but so it was a 9-month preparation process. The young man was the second youngest, so he was like 19 when Joel was killed. And trials happened a little more than 2 years later. But he had this thing about, I was Joel's mother, so I could slam him to the cross if I wanted to. It was the least that he could do. He grew up in South Boston. He grew up in what I used to call the old Harbor Projects, and now is called the Mary Ellen McCormick Housing Development. We talked a lot. I bet he wishes that I had gone in there and just slammed him. Because he's tough. He can take it. But what's harder, and what was harder, was reaching in to his heart and soul. Punishment is imposed. Accountability comes from the heart and soul. And so we talked a lot. All the kids who killed Joe were white. They were all from poor and working class communities on the edge of South Boston and Dorchester. So we talked a lot about that. We talked about what it was like to grow up poor and working class. We talked about what it was like to be raised Catholic. We talked about what it was like to be Irish American. We talked about the values that we had in our families, in our communities, that we learned in our churches, school. We talked about where he strayed from them, what he needed to do to get back to them. We talked about the fact that he missed his sister's wedding in Ireland and that Joel missed his sister's wedding. We talked about the fact that when his father died, he had to go to, he was able to be released from the prison long enough to go to the funeral parlor, but he was there completely isolated from family and friends. It was not a time when everybody else was there. He was shackled and cuffed. He was there, he was allowed to stay 10 minutes and then drove back. I got a phone call saying what time he was going to leave the institution, what time he was going to get to the funeral parlor, what time he was going to leave the funeral parlor, what time he was going to get back to the institution. And I remember thinking, oh, that's awful. Because like I said, there are no winners here. And I had seen, I worked on Bowden Street in Dorchester, which for many, many years. And it's one of, again, language I don't like, but it's one of 5 hot spots. And so I saw a lot of kids growing up that I knew when they were wee little ones, and I knew their tender stuff, their poor self. I strongly believe we all have a poor self, a best self. And that no matter what we do, we can come back to it. It's always there. It doesn't go away. Substance abuse, robbing people, different lying, different things kind of take us away from it sometimes, but it's always still there. So I knew kids, and I knew them in their best self. And some kids I saw grow up and do fine for themselves. Some do great. And some kids I saw in and out of lockup, each time coming out with a sort of another notch on their belt. Now the kids who wear bracelets, like they sit like this, showing off their bracelets. And so I would see stuff like that, and I would think, this isn't doing any good locking these kids up. What are they learning? They're learning to shut off their emotions. They're learning craftier tricks, criminal tricks. So I knew that I wanted something different in these encounters, that I really wanted to push people at their core self. I really wanted to push people. Michael, to start with. I really wanted to push him. I really wanted to push him in terms of accountability. And so we talked about all of these things. And then at one point, the meeting went all day. We took a break for lunch. And when he first came in, sweat was dripping from him. It was dripping from him. He was scared to actually face me. So a lot of times people say restorative justice is soft on crime. But it's a really hard thing to have to sit face to face, eye to eye, with the mother of the person you killed. I asked Michael, so what are you going to do when you get out of here? Because I thought this was my one chance to meet him, which was the sort of way the policy is. But so he said, I don't know, I'll probably work in construction. I'm never coming back to prison. I'm never going to hear another victim impact statement again as long as I live. He said those really just did me in, having to sit through those and hear them. So that's actually good for people to know. And I said, Michael, everybody in the joint says they're never coming back. So what can you give me? He said, I can't give you anything. You just have to take my word for it, and time will tell. So I told him that based on his intentions, I wanted to give him a piece of my forgiveness, and I wanted him to hold on to it. And he was like, oh, no. And I said, no, I want you to have this. And I want you to know what it is that you have, the gift that you have in taking it. I don't ever want your guilt at what you did to be your excuse to continue doing dirt. When you walk out this door, and I think you had about 5 years' time, when you walk out this door and you cause no more harm to self, family, and community, you can have the rest of it. And you won't even have, you'll just know you got it. You won't have to see me again. But I got out into the parking lot and I said to John Wilson, I'm going to have to meet with him again before he gets out. And so he had a really hard time. And so this is part of what is really important as we do shift mindsets and shift the paradigm and start to put things like this into place. Is that when the person who's caused the harm, particularly when they're locked up, has this kind of an encounter, they need support afterwards. They need mental health support. So I go home to my family and my friends. He goes back into a cage, all alone, after this incredibly emotional experience. He had a really hard time. He wound up in the hole a couple of times. And this dialogue was the only one of the ones that I've had that was recorded. It was audio recorded and then transcribed. One of the times he was in the hole, he read the transcript and made a decision to do the rest of his bit in a better way. And so he did. I met with him again right before he was about to be paroled. It was, I think, about 3 years ago now. And it was right before Thanksgiving time, and he was probably one of the last people in Massachusetts to get parole after the Cianelli. So there was someone who was released and killed 2 brothers and one who killed somebody. So, but I met with him. But the other thing is, my first encounter with him, I brought pictures of Joel. So I brought pictures of Joel from the time Joel was a baby, to the last picture I had of he and I together, to the last pictures of him, which was that New Year's Eve with his friends. And told the stories. I brought an anniversary booklet from the first year anniversary where people wrote things, people took pictures of the tattoos they had in his honor, graffiti walls, art projects that people did. I brought that. And so, in this encounter right before parole, I asked if I could see him again, and they let me do it. And I asked if his mother could come. And they said yes, and I asked her to bring pictures of Michael growing up. And from those pictures came the stories of being a single mother, of having a kid who was in trouble, of being called up to the school, being called up to the youth center. I knew these stories because I was also a single mother, so I knew it. And of just not knowing what to do, of working 12 and 13-hour days and still not having enough money. And Michael had talked about that his mother had worked all this hard, that she never let him bring in stolen goods or anything. I asked him in the first encounter too, where did we fail you? Because as someone who had worked with kids and families all my life, that was a question I needed to ask. Where have we failed these young people that they can get to the point where they are killing each other? And he said, at that time, he said, no, don't give me that out. There were plenty of interventions that I did not take advantage of. And that was a piece of accountability that I heard from him, actually. But in this meeting, I told the story of a tribe in the Congo called Babimba, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's Babemba if you want to look it up. But in this tribe, in the villages, when someone in the village does something wrong, the whole village stops. Everybody sits in a circle. The person who caused the harm is placed in the center of the circle. And one by one, people go around and recount good deeds that this person has done. Positive strengths, talents, characteristics that this person has. Has to be genuine, has to be true, can't make it up. It's got to be for real. But the idea is not to let people off the hook. And this may work into the sort of reintegrative shame thing in some ways, but to remind them of their best self, of their core self. To remind them of their importance to the community. Everybody is a valued member of the community when given the opportunity to be so. So the idea is then to remember, not just in memory, but to actually remember the person back into alignment with the standards of the community. When I told that story, Michael and his mom had tears streaming down their face. And so as someone who worked in family support and strength-based models, I thought about those interventions. And I began to take a guess that most of them, if not all of them, were based on deficits. Were based on the deficits of Michael, of his family, of his community, of being poor, all of it, not on the strengths. I asked Michael what he had to be thankful for, because it was right before Thanksgiving. So he said everything: family, friends, freedom, you. I told him that I wished them good holidays. And I told him that that it was very hard for me to wish that, because I wanted to pull a bow on Christmas morning and have Joel jump out of a box. And I know that it can't happen. But it does me no good to say, oh, I hope your holidays are horrible. I mean, what good does that do? It doesn't, and to extend that, it doesn't do me any good to wish them a rotten life, because again, first of all, it just makes me a bitter old lady. Secondly, if they lead a rotten life, it's going to spew right back on me anyway. So So that's my thinking on that. When we were leaving the prison, we were in a glass room, which was a lawyer's room, and there was a guard station right behind us. And Michael stood up and was waiting for the guards to take him back to the block. And everybody hugged and everything. And his mother hooked her arm in mine, and he watched it. And people who have been to prison know that you sort of walk a little bit, and then there's a door that opens into a trap, and then another door. And so he watched us sort of disappear arm in arm into the trap. There was one time she worked in a dental clinic at one of the community centers, and there was one time when there was like a Teens for Peace kind of rally thing, and I saw her come in at one point and like grab some coffee and go out. And then I needed to speak to Commissioner Davis, the police commissioner, and he was leaving, so I sort of was chasing him down the hallway, and there were all these reporters. There were media people with the clergy, and there were media people with street workers, and I spoke to Commissioner Davis, and then I turned around, and she came down the hall, we were like this, just standing right at each other, and she said to me, "Are you?" And I was like, "Yeah." "Are you?" And she said, "Yeah." And we didn't finish, but then we talked, and we were both crying, and I said, it was after I had met with Michael the first time. So in between meeting with him the first and second time, I said, "I really hope you can turn around." She said, "I do too, but I don't know, and I hope you don't get your hopes up," and all of this kind of stuff. And I was very struck by the fact that there was all this media around, and they had no idea what about this exchange, and not that we wanted them button in on it really, but anyway, that's just a sort of aside that I have. And she told him it was the right thing to do to testify, and kids don't think it's the right thing to do to testify. So she told him it was the right thing to do, and so she was very instrumental in this. And she's one of the families that I talk about in here who was very apologetic and cried and treated us respectfully in the courtroom. One family in particular, two families did not. I mean, they really, literally kind of blamed us for what was going on. So, backtracking into between those two times of meeting with Michael, I met with John G, I'll say, to differentiate him from the facilitator. And so he's the one with the reputation. Interestingly enough, though, by the time I meet with him, he also had sent me an apology letter. So that's who I'm referring to, that when I say I have to check myself on my own judgments, because sometimes you'll get something from people you least expect. And so he had sent me a letter of apology, which I'm not even quite sure how he did, because he's not supposed to. But anyway, it meant a lot to get it. And so by the time I meet with him, he's very close to being released, because he's the one that's got 8 to 10 years, and he's earned good time. So he's become a mentor on the block. He tells me that at first it was all about him. It was all about, not getting caught, throwing the gun and the knives down the sewer, burning the stolen van that they used, burning the ski mask. When they were caught, then it was all about making the best deal that he could, and then at sentencing about getting to the better prison. And that he also said that the whole time he was awaiting trial, he did not skip a beat. He continued to use and deal drugs inside. So I asked myself, who brings in drugs at that level? It's not visitors. Not that much drugs. So who brings those drugs in? He said that when he started going to NA and AA is when he owned his accountability, and wrote the letter, and that he at that point was leading 12-step groups on the prison block and was a mentor on the block. I knew he was getting, I met with him I think in February and he was getting out in May. So I knew I wanted something more concrete from him than I had asked from Michael on the first visit with Michael. So don't forget the second visit with Michael hasn't happened yet, right? So I asked him, I knew his mother went to my son's grave. So I asked him if when he got out, he would be willing to stand with me and John Wilson and his mother and father and make some commitments. And he said yes. So I want to read to you our exchange. This is me to him at first. Your release intensely brings home to me my sadness and grief about the fact that Joel cannot ever come home. I miss him terribly, and I imagine I always will. As I've said before, it's ironic that because of that, just as intense as my desire for your homecoming to be one that's peaceful, positive, productive, and promising. I wish you no harm. I wish you well. I wish all of that for you and for yours. Because Joel can never come home, it is the only way you can ever make amends to me. And it's also the only way you can make amends to yourself, your family, and the overlapping communities that you, your mother and father, and I live in. John George grew up in the old colony projects, which is also in South Boston. Forgive yourself, I shouldn't have said his last name, sorry about that. John G. Forgive yourself and accept the gift of forgiveness that I offer to you by being good to yourself and to others. Show up in the world with good intentions and actions. In honor of Joel and the life you helped to take away from him, and in honor of you and the life you still have to live, will you make a commitment today to continue working your program through NA and AA? And he said, yes, I will. Will you make a commitment to keep your job and go to work every day and make an honest living? And he said, yes, I will. Will you make a commitment to make time and take opportunities to talk with young people in an effort to help them from making some of the same mistakes that you did? He said, yes, I will. And will you make a commitment to act in ways that help you to stay connected to your core self, the self that is true, the self that is good and wise and powerful? And he said, yes, I will. And will you make a commitment to show up with good intentions and do all in your power to cause no further harm to yourself, your family, and community? And he said, yes. And then I told him that I'd like to offer him my gift of forgiveness and asked him if he would accept it by being good to himself and others. And he said, yes, he would. And then he said to me, the first thing I'd like to do today is to apologize to you, Janet, your entire family, friends, and community, to you, Ma and Dad, and most importantly to Joel. I know that I've said it many times in the past, but I feel as though I could never say it enough. A day doesn't go by that I don't think about the pain and suffering I caused by committing such selfish acts in the past. I think about the man I used to be, and it saddens me. I feel a great sense of shame when I think about the person I was in the past. I do realize that the past is the past, and that as much as I'd like to change it, I cannot. I also realize that I can control my future. I give my word to you, Janet, and Ma and Dad, that you don't ever have to worry about me going back to my old ways. I know that for some, that may or may not be believed. All I can do is let time be the proof. There'll be a day that people will be able to look back and say he meant what he said. Until that day, all I can do is offer my word. I know what I need to do in my life to assure a positive lifestyle, and that's exactly what I'll do. I'll stay on the right track. I'll help other people not to do the type of things I used to do. I'm going to do what I need to do in order to remain sober and not cause any more harm to myself and family and community, or to you, Janet, along with your family. I'd like to end this again with another apology to everyone, and would also like to thank you for all the opportunity to speak my feelings. Thank you. So the common language you hear in what I say and what he says is actually from the preparation process. But he also asked then if he could read a poem. Broken hearts shed tears in a soul full of shame. As I reflect, there's no one but myself to blame. Families torn apart and one life lost. If I could change the past, I'd do so at any cost. A young man's future never to be seen, a family's devastation never to be serene. To deserve any punishment that may come my way, all that's to do is to kneel down and pray. Wanting to say sorry, knowing it's not enough, living with that, it's going to be tough. A changed man unable to change his past, a positive future I promise to last. So both of these young men are keeping their commitments. John G's been out about 5 years and Michael about 3. They're both fathers. John G graduated from a trade school with a B+ average and is actually going on to start his own business. Michael is working in security. But he is. Anyway, but they're both doing what they said they would do. And they have sat side a couple of years ago. They both sat side by side with me on a panel about the benefits of restorative justice and what this had. And they both said that they had no doubt that if they had not had this encounter, they would either be dead or reincarcerated. When I came in, the victim service person, we had it at the Suffolk County DA's office, and there was like 70 people in the audience, and the audience was like, there were undersecretaries in the room, there were DAs in the room, there were cops in the room, there were youth workers in the room, there were other survivors in the room, there were teachers in the room. There was just this whole mix of people in the room. And when I came in, the director of victim services had given them the squeeze balls. And when I came in, Michael was just like, oh, thank God you're here. We're scared shitless. And I said, well, you ought to be, but it's okay, it's gonna be all right. And but it was amazing to sit side by side with them. And somebody said to me, someone in the audience said, you know, it's like you lost your son Jim, but you have 2 new sons. And I said, no. These young men are not my sons, but they are our community sons. They are sons of our community. And so I care for them on that level because I care about our community. What they do and how they live their life will affect our community. And so, you know, and John G agreed. There was a photojournalist who was doing a series on how survivors heal. So, you know, he agreed to be in this photo that, you know, traveled some. Michael has agreed to be in the documentary. He shadowed because of his job and his family, but and so they are amazing in that level of accountability. And I have to say that recently, for the film, we went to the cemetery with Michael, who had never been to the cemetery before, and he had asked, oh, there's 2 things I'd like to say about Michael. He had asked before if he could go to the cemetery. And I said, it's fine with me, but if you see somebody there, you better not stop, because I can't guarantee who they are or what they might think or do. So he never went because of that. One thing I wanted to say about Michael, there's this one story that I really love, because my daughter, who is also a social justice activist, but she said to me, be careful, Mama. Don't throw your pearls in the mud. This was right before I was going to meet with Michael for the first time. So he wrote a letter in between the first visit and the second encounter to John Wilson. And in the letter it says, please tell Miss Connors to let her daughter Shana know that her mother didn't throw her pearls in the mud. I wear them around my neck to keep me in check. So symbolically, of course, because I never owned a set of pearls, but yeah. So they are both doing what they need to do. They're not my best friends. I don't have that picture of John George and me hanging on my living room wall or anything like that. But I do care about them because I do care about what they do because they are sons of our community. And one of the things that I said to Michael in this, we went to the cemetery and then we went back to the Lewis Brown Peace Institute and had another sort of little dialogue with one another. And one of the things I said to him was, you know, you have an obligation, because he sort of, the part that's harder for them is informally they're talking to youth, but they haven't like stepped out and done it. So Michael, I think, is kind of ready to do that. And I said, you really have an obligation to do that. He said, I know. And I said, I also wanted to let you know, Michael, that you have a lot of power and influence in this story. Because if you weren't keeping these agreements, this story would be crap. This story would just be another, oh yeah, sure, you know, I'm never gonna get arrested again, I'm never gonna go to jail again, and here I am in jail again. So if you weren't keeping those agreements, this story would mean nothing. It's the fact that both of you are indeed keeping the agreements that makes the story powerful. And you have a lot of power and influence because you are keeping those agreements. So.
I have a suggestion, if this is all right with everybody. We were going to divide up into smaller groups and have discussions. We've got Janet here. I'm wondering if we should just stick together as a group and continue our conversation with Janet. And take a 15-minute break, come back, and Stephanie's going to have some things she wants to say, that she is going to say, and not have the Gruppinos this week. What do you think? Is that all right with everybody? So let's take if that's all right with you, I know that, thank you. So we'll come back in 15 minutes and you have questions for Janet, we'll have a conversation, okay? What can I get you? We started talking, Janet, I was reminded of the fact that we lost a great friend on Monday. Who, when you were talking about your days in 19 and the boycotts and all that, Pete Seeger died.
Yeah.
Does everybody know Pete Seeger? If you don't know Pete Seeger, you got to get to know Pete Seeger. We Shall Overcome, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, the Hammer song. What was that? How did that? If I Had a Hammer. And one of the great moments for me, Janet, was standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial when he and the Boss Band were singing at the first inauguration of Barack Obama. It was like there's a new day. This is great. So at any rate, we sit at your feet here, Janet, and thank you for all this, all your wisdom and your willingness to share it with us. Questions, thoughts, reflections. This is going to be a conversation, and you might have other things you want to hear about, and Janet can talk about it. So, what are your any questions? Danielle.
I just had a question about something you said with the one of the dialogues that was facilitated for you, and you read the thing that the young man had written. And at one point you said that he was using a common language of the process. So,
well, there was a common. What I said to him and what he said to me, there was a lot of common language in that.
Right.
So that came from the sort of preparation process of, you know what I'm saying. So the language of accountability, the language of doing the right thing and all that sort of stuff. I can't remember the exact words,
Right.
but yeah. So that's why. Because it wouldn't ordinarily be his language in a lot of ways, so, but it came from that process. So in some ways it's like he was saying what he knew he was supposed to say, but I never doubted the sincerity, and it wasn't like I didn't feel like it was scripted.
So with that, how do you
I guess what do you see as the purpose of having kind of scripted language, and do you think that that maintains the authenticity?
I don't think that the language is so much scripted as that it is just, it is the language that sort of gets to the heart of it.
Okay.
So yeah. Yeah.
What were your expectations in going in and speaking with Michael and John?
I didn't know what my expectations were exactly. I did in some ways know because we had this preparation. Forgiveness was not my intention. And I should actually, and I would like to make that distinction actually, because restorative justice is not necessarily about forgiveness or reconciliation. So, and victim-offender dialogue. Sometimes people want to find out information. They have the information. You want to know what happened that night, and they know it. They're the ones who know it. Sometimes people just want to confront them eye to eye, face to face, as opposed to a victim impact statement, which is addressed to the judge, right? So forgiveness did happen for me, and I like to say that forgiveness actually is, for me, it happens on two levels. So one is a spiritual level. It's between me and my God. It's in prayer. It's to free my heart, so my heart doesn't turn to stone. But eye to eye, face to face, side by side with these guys, forgiveness comes with accountability. So it wasn't my intention for forgiveness, but I did want to find out some information. And I'm still finding out information. When we went to the cemetery in this most recent thing, I think the finality of what Michael did struck him like it had not struck him in either of the two conversations we had had. But to be standing on Joel's grave, and he sobbed and sort of fell into my arms. And then I was watching some sample scenes recently that Julie sent me, the filmmaker sent me, and she, in one of her interviews with him that I was not part of, he actually said, so there was a big knife, my son was stabbed in his heart, but there was also a smaller knife wound on the shoulders. So my oldest son had said to me when I was first meeting with Michael, I said, is there anything you want me to ask him? And he said, yeah. Ask him if he made that other stab wound. So when I asked Michael that in the first encounter, he said, I think I must have. Everything happened so fast, but I think I must have. So then I'm watching the sample scenes, and he says, it was chaos, it was madness. I might have even pushed Joel into the big knife. He didn't say the big knife, but I might have even pushed Joel into the knife. I don't know what happened so fast. But so even now, after all this time, there's still levels of accountability. And some of it is because they were traumatized that night too. And so some of it is they're also recovering the memories of the reality of that night. But I wanted to do it, I knew that I wanted to tell them, don't cause any more harm. I knew that I wanted to tell them that. I knew that I wanted to say, you know what, you stole a life, but you have a life, and it's really precious. And because you have it, please make the best of it, because it's the only way you can make amends to me. So I did know I wanted to say that. And I did know that I wanted to stress to them the importance of them not coming out and continuing to do the harm that they did. These kids, routinely, they sold drugs and stuff, but they routinely stole cars, broke into homes, home invasions. So it was like a sport. They would decided, let's steal a van. That day, they testified, let's go steal a van. All right, so should we go to South Shore Plaza or should we do a home invasion? They were like deciding which activity to do, you know. So I did know that I wanted to tell them that I really felt like they owed it to their families and the community and me and my family to change up.
This is a really ignorant question, but what is the home invasion actually a slang term?
No.
So it just means legally, like literally breaking into someone's home?
When they're
Is-
there.
When they're there. So that's a legal term.
Yep.
So it's not something those kids were throwing around. That's actually what the legal system labels the action.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Is the intent to steal drugs?
The intent is usually to steal. Sometimes it's, although rapes, their intent can sometimes be rape and physical harm too. Their intent was to steal. Their intent was to steal electronics, equipment, money, and drugs.
Any,
You spoke about how in your community, some kids, they didn't get into trouble while others had this pattern of getting into trouble. So in your opinion, what do you think your community did that failed them? And also, what do you think a good remedy or a good healing process for them?
You know, I don't really know the answer to the question completely, because kids can come from the same community and the same family, and some can do well and some can be in trouble all the time.
Whitey Bulger and Billy Bulger.
Yeah.
Sort
I
of.
was gonna say, really? Sort of.
Sort of, yeah.
But yeah, and so I don't really know. I do feel like a lot of what's going on is generational trauma. Is generational and societal hurt and injustice. I have kids, you know, I do work at Charlestown High, but most of the kids who go there come from Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. And so during desegregation, South Boston and Charlestown were two of the most vehement, dangerous places for the young students of color to be bussed into. And I've had kids say to me, you know, we don't really know what exactly went on here, but we can feel it in our bones when we come. So I feel a lot like that the anger and rage that is going on for so many young people comes from the history of injustices, of slavery, of racism, of poverty, and that they don't have a way to express that positively or to make change with that, and so it's coming out by hurting one another. That's my feeling about it. I would love to see. There's a man in England who took this place, Hull, England, which is a very poor place, and they made it into a restorative city. So I would love to start seeing people start thinking about restorative justice way outside of the criminal justice system, in communities, in schools. I would love to see all the residents in housing developments, or several residents in housing developments being trained to lead circles, to lead a restorative justice process, to hold circles as relationship building and community building first. In the schools, we do that so that then when there is an incident, there's already relationships there. So I would love to see residents in housing developments being trained to hold circles. Some to just to discuss what's going on, some to just discuss different topics, to build relationships, to build community, and then to circle up around the kid in a family if you saw someone who needed that kind of support. For me, it's about a balance of support and accountability. So that's what I like to say, Lady Justice, that's what she's got swinging in her scales, support and accountability. It's both things. And so I feel like I would like to see communities really take up restorative justice and restorative practices as a way of being, not just within systems. So, does that answer?
Sarah.
I was wondering about the 17-year-old you mentioned, and if you know what's going on with him, if you see him or his family or in the community, and how you kind of deal with that.
Now there's a story.
So, So both my daughter and I had the opportunity, we each at different separate occasions had the opportunity to run him over. As he crossed the street in front of us, and we didn't. And I remember consciously saying, keep your foot on the brake, keep your foot on the brake, keep your foot on the brake. So, so it's been hard. It is hard to see him. My oldest son is a mail carrier, and he delivers packages in the South End. But for a long time, he worked at the same post office as this young man's mother, who was one of the people who did not treat us nicely in the courtroom. I actually met with her too at one point. But she was high most of the time, so she didn't really remember her mistreatment. She's in recovery now. He went on to do other things. He had several armed robbery charges. He had a kidnapping charge. We actually read in the paper that he had this person, he stripped down naked and told him if he tried to escape, he would kill him, and I've killed before. We also heard a story that he one time, that one of his uncles was having a fight with his mother, an argument with his mother, and he said, "Don't talk to my mother like that again, or I'll put you 6 feet under, and don't forget I know how." So he also, on these charges and the arrest, was being transported in the transport van from an arraignment back to Dedham County Jail. And he climbed up through the roof hatch in the transport van, shackled and cuffed. He fell off the van. He went into a coma. We heard he was brain dead. I had kids calling me saying, you know, this is poetic justice. We didn't have to do anything. He did this to himself. Some kids even said, you know, I'm happy he's brain dead. I couldn't be happy that anybody was brain dead, even him. It turns out he wasn't. He was in a coma, and he came out of the coma. I did go to those trials, and his mother, I remember his mother saw me and said hello, and I said hi, and she said, I said, "Is this the room David's being tried in?" And she said, "That's why you're here, my David?" Because my oldest son's name is David too. "My David?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I want to see him be held accountable for something." But he got 3 years and 3 years probation for a string of charges. So once again, I felt really let down by the system. He's out now. I have no idea what he's doing. I heard he moved down to the South Shore, so you better watch out. So I've heard that he's moved on the South Shore somewhere, that him and his mother moved on the South Shore, and I don't know. He's also a father. He's also a father of 2 children. And one of them, during this string of incidents, he, at his sentencing, standing right next to him was his girlfriend at the time, who was standing next to him, also shackled and cuffed, 7 months pregnant, being sentenced to Framingham. So she's out now too. But so I don't know what he's doing now. It is hard to think about seeing him. It's hard to think about my oldest son is who I worry about the most in terms of running into him. And whether or not he might pop.
Emery, you had a question?
Yeah, my question is, would you say that the dialogues with these guys helped your healing process?
Do I think that
the dialogues that you did with the guys?
Yes, I do feel like it was a healing process. I feel like it was healing for all of us, for them and for me. I don't think I'm totally healed. I don't think I'll ever be totally healed. I do feel, and I actually think that this is important for people to know. I think that survivors of homicide victims, oftentimes, particularly when it's your child, because there's the sudden death no time to say goodbye, but there's also the intentionality of somebody else taking another person's life. And we have an open wound. And so healing for us is learning how to take care of the wound so it doesn't fester. And when people, and I've heard, I do a lot of survivor to survivor support, so, and I've heard survivor after survivor to survivor talking about it when they go to a therapist who seems to indicate that they are someday going to be healed from this. It's detrimental, because then you start to feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm not healed. But there is a measure of healing, absolutely, for sure. And some people call restorative justice healing justice. There's enough of a measure of healing that I get up every morning and get dressed and go and do good things. and believe me, at first every day I had to say, get up, get dressed, you know. And there's a lot of people who don't. There's a lot of people who really never fully come back. So, yeah.
You kind of just touched on it, but can you speak to the support groups that you're a part of now, and like if you see this, your experience, like what you went through, and talking to those two guys, like, do you see that duplicated with people in their support groups?
Some people want to do it, other people don't. I feel like everybody's journey is different. I mean, even my oldest son, you know, he went to Michael's parole hearing and was just like, you know, I don't believe him. You know, he was an a-hole then, he's an a-hole now, and you know, but David understands that this is what I needed to do, because he understands what community means to me and what my life's work was. So this process helped validate the importance of my life's work. It helped restore the importance of my life's work. And all families will be different within the families, and many survivors are different. So there are survivors who you know, want people to rot in jail. And that, if that's what they need to hold on to, that's what they need to hold on to. And I don't even want to say that's where they are now and maybe they'll change, because that might not happen. They might just stay there. But there is a range of people, and right now some of the work that we're about to start at Norfolk Prison is about doing a restorative process with men inside who have committed violent crimes and other survivors of homicide victims. So we'll be on this journey together in this victim offender education group. So we've modified our curriculum from San Quentin. And ours is more about bringing more survivors in. Bringing survivors in more often, not just like to be on a panel as part of the curriculum. So to really be on the journey together. And the reason for that is because, is going back to what I said in the beginning, there are some of us who understand that as huge as this loss is for us as individuals, the loss to community, the continued cycle of violence and the loss to community is greater. And that this work in the prisons, in juvenile detention centers is one way, is one important way, I think, that can help to stop that cycle.
This is a little personal, but it was something that struck me that reverberated in the text that we read today with the stories of people who have been harmed, families of a lot of homicides. And there were no pictures of the people who were murdered. And there's not a picture of Joe. And so I didn't know, I was wondering if you could talk about that in terms of what the picture is for you and what it symbolizes and where the memory comes into the interplay with that. And I was really struck that I didn't see in this text not one picture. Yeah.
I actually, sometimes when I talk, bring a picture of Joel. And usually in January I actually have my button on. I just didn't have it on today. But I think there have been some projects that have really brought forward the victims. So there was one project that was called Anonymous Boston. Did anybody see that? Somebody sort of got them over there.
Yeah, I saw it.
Oh, you saw it? Okay. So Anonymous Boston was in response to the vile online comments that are made anonymously about homicide victims and their families. It is horrifying what gets posted online. It's racist for the most part and blaming the victim stuff. So this young woman, Joanna Marinova, did this project, and she had a photographer whose name is Ernesto Arroyo. And they met with families, and they took pictures of us holding the picture of our loved ones. And then she also showed pictures of our loved ones sort of growing up. There was a slideshow, there was pictures, there was a little story with each person. And then from that, there actually became a CD. So local artists, local hip hop artists were matched up with the families, and they did a song for our loved ones. So and I should start bringing this, because there's a woman named Kim Book who does this work in Delaware. She's the only person in the country that does victim offender dialogue through a nonprofit that she set up after her daughter was killed. Everywhere else, as far as I know, it's done through the DOCs. So Kim actually was here at a conference. We were both on a panel together. I gave her a copy of the CD. So the song that was made for me was by Ernesto Arroyo and Begwe Brown. And Ernesto is my daughter Shana, one of my Shana's best friends. So, and it's called Peace Warrior. So Kim actually asked me to send her some pictures. So she put the CD to pictures. So you make me realize that I should bring that in and show that when I do these kinds of things. So thank you. Yeah. And then there was a billboard project that Mothers for Justice and Equality did. And that had our children on it. Then there were billboards, and it said "It's not okay, murder, it's not okay," which is the Mothers for Justice and Equality slogan. And now there's another billboard project that has actually both mothers and their sons or daughter on the billboard, and those are largely in Mattapan right now. And then Mothers for Justice and Equality we're working on a book that will have a picture of us, a picture of the person that we lost, and a little bit of a story. So, yeah, it is important to bring. I like to say we can't bring them back, but we can bring them forward in everything we do. So I thank you for that reminder to include pictures.
I guess one thing that I'm struggling with is the idea of, when you're talking about restorative justice communities entirely separate from the justice system. And I'm just wondering, particularly given that the 17-year-old kind of hasn't come around, as many people would say, do you think that the other two could have gone through this process if they hadn't actually been incarcerated?
Could have gone through the process if they hadn't been incarcerated? You mean if they hadn't been caught, so to speak?
Right.
But somebody in the neighborhood knew who they were?
Or maybe caught, but had this process before the sanctions were imposed. Is that
Right.
clear?
If they hadn't been arrested in prison. I know you said that one of them said that was what stopped the cycle for them.
Right.
So do you think they would have been either as willing to reflect and kind of let it all in if they hadn't?
At that point in time, I'm not sure. Because I think a lot they were trying not to own up to it. So I'm not sure. It maybe could be. I mean, the juvenile court stuff that Erin and I do is pre-adjudication. We've done a couple of situations in Suffolk County that has not been pre-adjudication, that have actually worked out pretty well too, which would be kind of more in line, but they're not for homicide. But there have been some serious things. There's been some arson, there's been, beat downs kind of things, stuff like that. And they have seemed to have been effective for those young people. So the one in Lowell that Erin runs, and she'll talk more about it, it's pre-adjudication in it. The agreements are made, and the young people have the families come, which also makes a big difference because the families aren't active participants in court. So if they make their agreements and they keep those agreements within 6 months and do not reoffend in any way, then they actually do not have a record in those. So, and we've had one kid who reoffended in the 2 years, I think, which has been 2 years, 3 years. So.
Yes.
This might also be too personal, but I'm just wondering, how do you get over fear? Yeah, that's my question.
Fear of who?
Of people like the people that killed your son.
I don't know. I wasn't afraid, and maybe it's because because John Wilson is very skilled at what he does, and that the preparation process was really thorough, and that is part of what you set up. It is, safety parameters. So John Wilson would not have gone forward with a dialogue if he thought in any way I wouldn't be safe. And if something happened through a dialogue, he would stop it. Does that answer your question? I was never I was never afraid of them. I was mad at them. But I was never afraid of them. I'm afraid of what I say. I'm afraid, and I haven't got over this. I'm afraid that maybe someday David, who killed my son Joel, and my David would run into each other, and my David would pop. I'm afraid of stuff like that. But and the one who is actually sort of the most dangerous, is the one who's serving life. So I'm not really afraid of him. He is incarcerated at the prison that I do work at, and right now they've just asked me to have no contact with him, and I'm like, really? You control every movement. Why do I have to say I'll have no contact with him? But anyway. Yeah. But but I also don't know if I decided that I wanted to do a dialogue with him, if they would let me keep coming in as a volunteer. So I don't really know. But I guess I was never afraid of them. I was afraid until they were caught. I was. But again, I was afraid that someone else was going to get hurt. I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid for the kids.
Yes.
Near the beginning, you cited a statistic that for every homicide, 10 people are significantly affected, and then you doubted the truth of that statistic. And I think that the stories that you've shared about all the lives and all of the interconnection has borne out that many more than 10 lives are significantly affected. If you were generating your own non-scientific statistic about how many lives you think are affected by using this one homicide as an example, thinking about, the ripples of people who did harm, then their partners and kids and parents. And
right. There was 800 people at Joel's funeral. So that's just in the funeral. So some of them are colleagues of mine and stuff, but still they're affected too. So I can't even begin to estimate exactly, but I mean, I think that at least I would say that probably 100 people at the very least are affected by a homicide when you start to, as you say, go out into those ripples. And you just don't know. You just don't know where they are sometimes. And siblings and classmates. So siblings are often neglected. People often pour support out for parents. And siblings are often neglected. And then like classmates and neighbors and things like that, they are really the hidden survivors. And it's their unmet mental health needs are also contributing to the cycle. So I think, for me, it's hard to sort of pin it down to an individual homicide and its effects, because for me, every homicide affects the whole community.
You several times mentioned circles.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your work in circles and why it's important to you.
So I love circles. Because I always say that they are simple, flexible, and it's deeply meaningful. So I'm the person that is at every meeting saying, that would be a good place for a circle. That would be a good place for a circle. So I love circles when there's nothing going down, because that is what builds trust and relationships and a sense of community. And we get to explore topics that, like race and class and stuff that we don't really talk about so much in this country, in a contained, in a safe container. Circles give equality to everybody in the circle. The talking piece is the great equalizer, and that was taught to me by one of my teachers, Kate Pranis. And so, because everybody has a voice, so those people who don't usually speak can speak. People can pass. It always amazes me how circles come out. So this young man who's like, can I go to court with you and testify on your behalf? You broke my nose, but can I do that? It just amazes me what comes from circles, and the power of the circle is not in the person who's keeping the circle. It's not like a facilitation or a facipulation, as I like to say, because I think a lot of times facilitating, you're kind of manipulating things a little bit. Mm-hmm. So this is more, and facilitation, I thought I made it up.
That word.
I know, but I didn't make it up. It's actually a word. So facipulation.
Facipulation.
So the power comes from everybody in the circle. And everybody in the circle has equal voice. Everybody matters equally in the circle. You bring in unlikely people together. We're probably going to do some work with again, bad terminology, a high-risk youth network that's run by the Black Ministerial Alliance, and they had guest speakers. They had police come and they have a monthly meeting for providers of to youth and youth. And they had the police come in May, I think it was. And so some of the people at the meeting said, I know you think you're helping these kids. They said to the police, I know you think you're helping these kids, but you're contributing to this racist system. Haven't you read Michelle Alexander's book? And, and so it got very charged. And so we're supposed to be doing a series of 5 circles to kind of talk through some of that stuff. Now, the person that we were negotiating with in the police department is Superintendent Gross, who's now second in command just since the election. So he's a little bit not answering us right now. But so, and I do circles in the aftermath of homicide, sometimes where we let the kids, same as I did with Joel's friends. So we let the kids, express their grief and loss, talk about something that they really admire about this person, a memory that they'll hold, some characteristic that they admire about this person that they will now walk in their lives in that person's honor. So there's circles that are healing. There's just so much flexibility with circles. It is absolutely amazing to me. We've used circles as preparation to help survivors prepare for court, to sort of know what's expected, particularly if someone's going to testify or decide whether to testify or not testify if they're not subpoenaed, and to prepare for verdicts in the aftermath of an unfavorable verdict. So in the juvenile justice system, a couple of cases now at Suffolk, and we're hoping to get that moving a little bit more under the Center for Conflict and Transformation at UMass. And then Erin's program, which is the Juvenile Court Restorative Diversion Program out of Lowell, under Judge Blitzman. There's no, for me, there's just like nothing that can't be turned into a circle. And I do believe that they are very powerful and very healing.
What about your work in schools?
Okay, yeah.
Because this is a whole important area of your
So
work.
yeah, in schools, I work for the most part. Sometimes I get called into a school in a situation, but I would rather not do that. So I work in a small learning community at Charlestown High. A small learning community means there's about 70 kids in the program, and they're older kids, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 16 is the youngest. They tend to be more like 18 to 20. Kids who are really behind in their credits but want to get a high school diploma. And again, if I use the terminology, they would be overage and undercredited. But
you don't like labels, do you?
I don't like labels. I really don't like labels. But so we have a peer justice system, and I used to do work at a school called the Social Justice Academy as well as Charlestown, but it was closed. It was in the Hyde Park High Complex, and it was closed a few years back. So in both situations, we have a peer justice system. At Diploma Plus, the young people have named themselves the Justice League. So we handle situations of conflict. We handle situations of, a kid who's like really falling off track, tardy a lot, missing out, not doing their work, falling behind, that kind of stuff, in a circle, led by the students in the peer justice system. I'm in the room to make sure that they move it from past, present to future, and that they don't get into a jam again, but they are leading it. And again, if young people if they make agreements to make it right as possible and keep those agreements, then they are not suspended, and they're not, or they won't have to serve at this detention, or they're given another chance to stay in the program. One of the things we stress is, there's a waiting list to get in this program, so if you're not working it, then that's not right to those people who are waiting to get in. So again, it's that support and accountability thing.
Yes, sure.
So granted, like no situation is the same, and all the parties in every crime are always different. But do you think that money could or should play any role? How would it make you feel? It seems like our reading talked a lot about how some people want offenders to have to pay restitution and stuff. And I was just wondering what you would think about money being introduced to the whole kind of restorative system.
Well, I mean, I think I eke out a living doing this. I do a little bit here, a little bit there. I don't work under any one really umbrella organization, and I scrape that. I am scraping by. And I'll never pay the IRS. They'll be like, they're worse than credit card companies. You pay them, and it's just, it never goes away. Well, I mean, I keep on paying what I need, my monthly payments, but so and health insurance and all of that kind of stuff. So there's there's a piece of me that sometimes feels like, man, it would be nice to, you know, to have had somebody who, and again, it's that language thing of nice and happy and everything that we're using, but if one of these young people had money to give to me for my retirement, for my health insurance, for something, I would take it. We never filed a civil suit. We're talking about kids from the projects who grew up as poor as I was, and you know, so I don't think that money, people have a bad thing about money. People think that money taints stuff, and it can, but it doesn't have to. And it wouldn't be that money would be my prime objective if I had gone through that civil suit, but it would have been more about, you know, I really don't think I can, truthfully. I work really hard and I work a lot of hours and I do a lot of things, but I don't think I could do a 9-to-5 job anymore because of the impact of Joel. It's affected, the trauma has affected my memory. It's affected, I have, you know, polymyalgia, so it affects the stress of it has affected my ability and my mobility. So yeah, you know, and some people even think that restorative justice practitioners shouldn't get paid. You know, I'm like, really? I do a lot of things that I don't get paid for, but when I can get paid, I like getting paid.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask, yes, and then I'm gonna ask Stephanie if she.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm wondering what did your faith community do for you, particularly in the time immediately after, and or what could they have done?
So I was raised Catholic. I had an incredibly hard experience during desegregation with the church when the first black family moved into the neighborhood that my former husband and my son and I were living in, and it was the neighborhood I grew up in. We had come back to it, and when myself and some other people supported this black family, and the kids who were throwing rocks at this house were my brother and sister's friends. So we had community meetings, and one of them got broken up by this organization known as ROAR, which stood for Restore Our Alienated Rights, which was their premise was that they were against the government interference on where to send kids to school. But it was a cover for their racism, really, and they busted up the meeting. The chairs went flying, cameras got broken, and everything. And so then when I called the priest to reschedule another meeting, he told me that we couldn't have another meeting. And I said, why? And he said, because parishioners were complaining about the outside agitators. So I said, oh, funny, Father, because Monsignor, actually. Funny, Monsignor, because my grandparents came here from Ireland. They moved to this parish. Their children were baptized and went to school in this parish. My father's 5 children were baptized and went to school in this parish and church in this parish. My son was baptized and went to school in this parish. So how does that make me an outsider? And in terms of an agitator, am I an agitator then because I believed what you told me, that God created all people equal, that to love thy neighbor? And so it really broke me in terms of Catholicism and organized religion. I'm also a lesbian, and so at one point I did tried to return to the church, and had a hard time with some things that people had said to me. So, that being said, some of what I learned as a Catholic and learned in Catholic school is deeply ingrained in me, and it did guide me, and does continue to guide me through this. So, it's It's kind of like the Constitution. You know, the Constitution says great things, but a lot of it's not true. So, you know. So that's how I feel about Catholicism. But I do greatly believe in God, deeply believe in God, and I do feel like a lot of that what I really believed at being taught is what guided me.
I guess then the second part of my question was, what could a faith community, or more specifically, what would you want the role of, like, if you were active in a parish, or for people who are active in congregations, what would you see the kind of, I don't know, ideal role of that faith leader, of that minister, or reverend, or rabbi in that?
To really be there for people. A lot of people come in, you know, when I worked at the Peace Institute, that's immediate. They come in immediately afterwards. They come in for help learning what to do next, burial and stuff. So, and a lot of people feel like their pastor let them down. They didn't come. They didn't call on them. You know, that being said, you know, just the other day, a survivor friend of mine was in the newspaper because Greater Love Tabernacle Church had an interfaith service last Sunday night, and she got up and she spoke, and she's about when her son was killed, and she spoke about turning to alcohol and how she turned away, and how Pastor Dickerson always hugged her and loved her, and she said, I knew he smelled the alcohol in my breath, but he never judged me. So to really just have someone who will sit with a person, who will listen to a person, who won't judge a person. Many survivors are, at least temporarily, very angry with God and with religion.
Have you seen the movie Philomena?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Because it does do a number on the Catholic Church, but not on the Catholic faith. So,
yeah.
Stephanie.
This is going to be a dry transition. And I want to say, I'm going to draw something up on the board. I want to say something just as a, yeah, I'm fine, it's really fine. In preface to this, I'm just going to talk about trauma a little bit. A lot of it's going to be sort of classifying some of what you guys read. And I also want, I'm a little bit nervous, not because of the topic, thank you. I'm a little bit nervous because it's been a long time since I've actually talked about trauma, and especially since you've shared a deeply traumatic experience that is not over, that is still in process, that this is going to be a very sort of academic presentation of something that's not ultimately academic at all. And so I'm just prefacing it because it's an academic, this is an academic thought, not nitty gritty in the way that I think, and especially working in theology and trauma, I'd like to see trauma. And also, if any of you guys are interested in trauma, which I don't know if that's the case, I don't think anybody actually said that directly in our introductions, but there's a sort of academic shift away from talking about trauma. That's a long discussion, and moving it into something that's a little bit more, I don't want to use the word generalized, but speaking to the fact that so many people are affected, that trauma with a big T somehow loses its valiancy because so many of us have experienced it, and there's so many different levels, and there's different ways that individuals experience a traumatic event. So what happens to you in that traumatic event is different than what happens to me. And part of the way to qualify or to understand a traumatic episode has to do with understanding how people integrate that episode. So whatever that particular event or event is, the level of which we could call it a traumatization has to do with your ability to take that event, integrate it, and then continue to live. And how does that happen? And so somebody that's had experiences prior to a specific event is going to assimilate that event differently. And so that's all just some qualifications of sensitivity to the fact that we all experience trauma and that we all experience it differently. So one of the sort of key things, and I'll break this down into three. I'm going to make a circle, but I don't really I'm not
crazy about the image of a circle. Only because this, again, ignores some of what I just said. So first, there's the event of the trauma itself. Then there's some kind of gap here. When you guys read the text for today with all of the stories, that gap is represented by several things. I will say 3 in particular. 1, memory or lack of memory. 2, symptoms that come up as a way of expressing the event or as a way of denying or a way of repressing the event. And then 3rd is that there's actually a time issue that happens with the traumatic event, so that the trauma itself incurs some kind of loss of time. And time this is a whole actually academic, an academic area of study in terms of how linear time somehow no longer counts in the event of a trauma, because the trauma itself can be relived. So that's part of what I'm talking about, a gap. And then whatever is done in how the crisis is managed, or an awakening, or whatever is done that somehow goes forward in time. So this is a linear line with something that's not really linear at all. Okay, so a couple things just about my master's thesis was actually, I did 2. One was on gender and self and trauma, and another one was on transgenerational trauma. So specifically what you're talking about, how things get passed down from generation to generation. One of the things that fascinates me about that has to do with anything related to body, because I think the body communicates, and this again goes to the gap, because the trauma gets stored somewhere. And so if it's not remembered, it's still actually felt, and it's still actually expressed bodily. I've done a lot of work actually with traumatized bodies. This is my job in Manhattan, essentially. Both physical trauma and psychological trauma. I'm working with people that have had various levels of psychological trauma and trying to work that out physically. It's fascinating, but it speaks to another thing about the gap, which is the idea of a traumatic event having a certain level of inexpressibility. So the fact that there's a lack of language to even express the trauma itself. Okay, so just a couple of sort of things for notes if you feel so interested. A traumatic event involves an event or repeating of events that overwhelm the individual's ability to cope or integrate the ideas and emotions involved with that experience. This sense of being overwhelmed is something that you probably read in the text, that we've heard from you as well. But that there's something important about this idea of being overwhelmed by trauma, which is that it can be delayed. So, and many of you guys have probably seen different reactions. Someone who's emotional at the sight of any event of trauma, and then someone who doesn't hit them for weeks, months, and all of a sudden it's there. Again, this is discounting the linearity of the event, this linear process, and sort of speaking again to something that's happening again and again. And that's one of the big characteristics of trauma, is the idea that it gets repeated. The repetition can come from a triggering event. So a memory, this is part of my question about the pictures. I didn't know if maybe there was some sort of effect of a photo, and I'm sure at times there is and at times there are not, that re-trigger the actual memory of the trauma. When you get into insidious trauma, this is the guys, the perpetrators. I don't know if that word, is that an out word too? I think so. No, but I mean the idea, we actually had this talk at the beginning of class with the survivor and the victim language, and what is the appropriate language, the person harmed, the person who's doing the harming. But the idea that insidious trauma is something that's happening on a daily basis. I don't know if I would call insidious trauma necessarily physical abuse, but more like violence on the streets, where it's just, there's like a reality of your life that's just a traumatic reality. And so this gets repeated and repeated, and it's going to manifest itself some way. And it starts to get manifested as crime, or in terms of shame. There's two poles of this. One is withdrawn, which is a turn in towards violence towards the self, and the other is the projection of that violence outward. Okay, so one of the real big problems with this fact is that it's commonly ignored by health professionals. The fact that you've got repressed trauma, that the event itself might get recognized, but trauma is so ignored by mental health professionals. This is the people that are saying we can cure that. You're going to get better. You're going to get better, and the traumatic event then somehow is something that one should feel guilty or shame for. And you're going to hear me say shame a lot because that's just what I'm writing my dissertation on. So that's one aspect in the gap that happens as a result of trauma. One thing that was fascinating to me, though, and this is just an aside, is that what you all read, it was very interesting where shame came up in terms of those stories. Most of them had to do with people who were actually the victim. Instead of someone who had experienced like a homicide, it was someone who had incurred sexual abuse. The father who said that he told his son, I'm not taking you to my prison, go to the other one, and then he was killed. Do you recall the story I'm talking about from your text? Anyway, so it is actually the person on whom the crime was committed, instead of the contrary, or the people who have experienced a crime. That's just an aside. So common aspects of trauma, this is the violation of a person's familiar ideas with the world and of human rights, which leads to confusion and insecurity. And it was interesting, that's just a pretty general shared viewpoint on an aspect of trauma. But Zer, is that how you say his name?
Zer.
He actually says exactly the same thing in his book, but he's not really relating it to trauma. He said what is hurtful about crime is the damage done to our beliefs and the orderliness of the world and the sense of personal dominion. That struck me because he's talking about crime, but that's the same exact thing that I just read about trauma. So just to talk about a few symptoms. So in the gap, this is where we've got inexpressibility and lack of language. You get a re-experience of the event as a result of a trigger that leads to coping. This would be your linear. It's going to lead to some kind of coping mechanism that's not necessarily useful, which is drugs, alcohol, food, people, sex, crime, etc. Panic attacks, intense anger, which you spoke about. Upsetting memories, flashbacks, nightmares. Flashbacks, I don't know if you guys know this, but they're not necessarily mental images. They can also be physical responses. I think the physical side of trauma gets the most neglected. The scholars that work on it a lot, but I think that once you walk outside of circles that deal with trauma, the physical part of it is so underappreciated, how it gets stored. I think you even spoke about this, the fact that your body actually is different after the event. There's dissociation. I don't know if you guys know what that is. That's splitting, essentially, which means that you're removing yourself from a trigger, generally. There are various levels of that. The most extreme is multiple personality disorder, which is no longer actually in the DSM-5. Now it's dissociative personality something, I think. I've actually seen that before, and so that's where someone develops multiple sites of self that can go from being just ages to being names, where one person does an activity and the other person doesn't recognize it. What's the movie that's...
Eve, the one about Eve?
Yeah, the one about Eve. That's an older movie, though.
Yeah.
One of the things that you read about in the book, too, that I would put in this is suicidal ideations. I think one of the things that fascinated me, and I'll sort of end with this, to be brief, was in our book, and something that you mentioned too was and this is the theological aspect to me that's so important and worth thinking about. Even in a culture where we are seeing more and more quote unquote secularization, when it comes to trauma, there is such a move towards God, and reconceived differently than perhaps organized religion. But if you guys read that text last night, I don't know, there were more conversations and more comments than not about redirecting energy and God's presence. I don't know how much of that had to do with the fact that we're reading a book about people who were willing to be interviewed and talk about sort of their story and to use a theological term, resurrection from the trauma. But it's something to pay attention to. And I think that because anger at God also figured into that, and I also have a belief that regardless of belief in God, there's a God. I'm a theologian, remember. So the God has a place in everyone's life, whether accepted or rejected. And in trauma, there's going to be an image of God that has to be negotiated. Because there is some, again, back to what Zare said even, there's some failure in one's belief in the orderliness of the world, and that has some sort of component that's greater than oneself. That gets into another aspect of recovery from trauma, which is this idea of stepping into something that's bigger than you. In terms of the redirection of the energy, that if staying to oneself, I think the capacity for healing is really limited. And that relationships, and this is the newest research, especially with shame, that empathy and empathetic connections are critical to the healing process. That gets really interesting when you put that into thinking about therapists and what and whom can be a therapist. And I think that I can end there.
Very helpful. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Janet, I'd love your thoughts on this. I think that whether we're ministers or lawyers, whoever we are, really need to understand trauma. And we're grateful to have Stephanie with us who can give us insight. One thing that strikes me about your story is this whole idea of dominion, and because you decided early on you were going to assert your own personal dominion in life. And I just love to hear any quick thoughts you might have about what Stephanie said in terms of your own experience and what you think we need to know. That's a big question, I understand. But just you've said it a lot already, I think, in terms of your own journey and the way you approached it.
Well, I do think it is that sort of stepping up out of yourself, and and that it's funny. I have a survivor friend who really can slip into funks, and her son was killed shortly before mine, and we were in a support group together, and it was a structured 12-week curriculum, and we had to draw that night or the feelings of that night or something. I can't remember. But my friend drew. She had the black crayon and she was like this. And she covered every single inch of her paper except for one teeny, tiny spot in the middle. And so when she gets like that, I'm like, Jeannie, so what do you need to do? What do you need to do to see that little speck of light? Remember that little speck of light? What do you need to do with this? What do you need to do to come up out of yourself? So we talk a lot about that, coming up out of ourselves. And when she calls me in doing good, she'll say, I feel good today. I was able to minister to this one and to that one, to another survivor. So I think the whole idea of being able to come up out of yourself, you said, when people don't, then there's a little chance to heal. So those are the people who have trouble still getting up out of bed, getting dressed, I have heard time after time after time after time, kids, young children saying, when my brother was killed, my mother died too. And so I do believe that, so encouraging people to find something, to put their energy, to turn in their attention to surviving children, understanding, for me, but this is specifically for homicide, but understanding that someone doesn't have a life and we have ours, so let's make the best of it. Those kinds of things. Some of the survivor support stuff, sometimes it's like, I'll go into someone's house and I'll be like, "Yo, okay, can we pull up the shades? Well, let's go take a walk in the park." So it's I think it's like a lot of little things like that. And that's why I say in my thing, having the support of the importance of family and friends has been absolutely. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that and for that support. Joel's anniversary is Friday, and I already have 6 cards on my kitchen table. So. I don't know if I'm straying from the
No, but you're talking about the community of empathy, the last bunch of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Very powerful. Anything that anybody has that's really important to ask? Any other things? Well, let me just say this. My sense that.
Eileen had one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Eileen. Yes, I didn't see you.
I want to be a public defender when I graduate, and something I heard from you was a lot of anger towards the person that was defending, the person that did the harm, understandably. And I don't know if you see any, how would you envision that going differently, I don't know, given our justice system?
I met with him. He wouldn't meet with me without the detectives, but I met with him and the detectives. And, and I just needed to get it out. I just needed to how can you defend someone when you know they killed somebody? And it is still something that I wrestle with. I also know that it is the role in the system. I also know that when my daughter got into trouble, I hired a defense attorney. And like I say, that there is a place for people, people get railroaded who did not commit crimes. So it's really important for defense attorneys to have their role. When David, the person who killed Joel, got rearrested, when I showed up in the courtroom, so don't forget now. So I've met after the trials. I met with this defense attorney. His office is near my house, near this Irish bakery. Every time I see him, he's Irish American. Every time I see him, he's like flushed red. So when I walk into the court for the arraignment after this rearrest of this second wave of crimes that this young man went on, when I walk into the lobby, he looks at me and he gets red. And so then we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. We don't get called. They call for lunch. So we get called on second call and a whole new lawyer comes in. And he says, that Mr. Da-da-da isn't the lawyer anymore, and I am. And then I see the original lawyer in Papagino's, and he says to me, I didn't take the case. I said, yeah, I saw that. And he said, at some point, you're right. He said, at some point, people need to own their accountability, and it doesn't do them any good for me to be defending them. I don't know. I know that kind of breaks some stuff. And also, the young woman who second chaired with him was someone who was very active in the Youth Advocacy Project. And so she's behind me in line one day at Haley House, and I turn around to her and I say, hey, and she always avoids me. She avoids looking at me. So I just turn around and she's right behind me. I turned around and I said, hey. She went, hi. And I was like, you and I need to talk. And so we talked, but it is, I think that someone in my position is going to be angry at the defense attorney, so you're just going to have to suck it up. You know, I mean, everybody's not going to go around sort of making amends with the defense attorneys, but you know.
Yeah, it can happen. My sense is that applause is not the right response, but to say with our folded hands like this, thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And next week we get to meet Frank, who was somebody who did some harm. And he'll tell you about that journey as well. So I look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you again. And thank you, Senator.